Peter, thanks. Appreciate it. Gentlemen, please step into my office. Good afternoon and welcome. I want to thank Kate Seeley, Wendy Chamberlain, Peter Moore, and Yossi and Sami for agreeing to do this. I think we're going to have a very interesting discussion. A housekeeping rule or two. We'll probably go for about 30 minutes of dialogue, and then we'll turn to your questions, which hopefully will be questions. And if you could please identify yourselves before you ask your question. I'm the moderator today, and I'm in the middle, which is appropriate. And it reminds me of a quick story, which I think is probably appropriate to frame the discussion. It was February of 2001. Transition from a Democratic to a Republican administration had just taken place, and then Secretary of State Powell was preparing for his first Middle East trip. I had agreed to participate in briefing the Secretary, and he asked if I could explain the relationship between Arafat and Sharon and between Israelis and Palestinians, and I asked the Secretary if he had ever heard the story of the shark. And Powell's heard many stories, but he had never heard that one. He said, well, what's the story of the shark, and what does this have to do with Israeli-Palestinian peacemaking? I said, Mr. Secretary, when you're... Mr. Secretary, can everybody hear me, or is that off now? How about now? Okay. What does the shark have to do with Arab-Israeli peace? And I said, well, Mr. Secretary, think about it this way. When you're swimming away from a shark, you don't have to swim faster than the shark. You just have to swim faster than your friend. Powell got it, and it occurred to me, as I'm sitting here in the middle, that for the last decade or so, relationships between Israelis and Palestinians, certainly at the level of leaders, and there have been exceptions, have been zero-sum games. That is to say, the trust that is essential for peacemaking, necessary, by the way, but not sufficient. Personal relationships and trust are critically important, but they're not as critically important as creating a balance of interests between the parties. Without a balance of interests, without a symmetry of interests, without each side getting what they want, then it seems difficult to sustain it. In this respect, negotiations are not that different than good marriages, good business propositions, and good friendships. They require a symmetry of interest. And what strikes me as so unique and so rare is that in this climate of quasi-hopelessness, I will keep my own annoyingly negative views under control during the course of this discussion. We have in the Geneva... Right. We can mark the time. We have in the Geneva agreement and in Yossi and Sami the best, I think, of what really is required to do this. You need to understand the needs and requirements of the so-called other. You need to accept them as legitimate. They become a critically important part of your narrative, not just the narrative of the other. You have to incorporate them in your narrative if you're ever going to truly legitimize them, and then you need to find a way to reconcile them. Those three phases seem to me essential, and they've been missing. They've been missing, in my judgment, because we don't have the right kinds of leaders that are necessary and requisite to take these kinds of risks. But these two, it seems to me, set a new standard. I've known them both, Yossi longer than Sami. They are men of deep experience. They are not dreamers. And I think this is the other piece that needs to be recognized and accepted. Peace will be made not on the margins, but it's going to have to be embraced and sanctioned by the centers. It may require men and women of the left and the right, maybe in the Israeli case or on the right, transformed hawks in a way. But it is going to require experience, judgment, and integrity, and these two have it. So today's discussion will cover many things. I want to start with the Geneva process itself. I want to turn to Israeli and Palestinian politics, talk a little bit about the U.S. role, the possibilities in the future, and then close perhaps with a personal question to each of them. So I think I will start with you, Yossi. With respect to the Geneva process, when you strip it all away and you look at what has played out in this heroic effort during the course of the last 7 or 8 years, what is it that you think you've accomplished? What haven't you done? And if there were a rewind button on history, what would you change?
Well, I believe that the most important thing is that we helped creating a kind of a reference point. And if during the beginning of the 90s, between the Oslo Agreement and I would say the end of the 90s, the big question was, what kind of a solution are we going to have? I mean, well, it is on. I swear to God. Try again. Keep trying. Okay. Is it better?
You raise your voice.
Well, if I begin to shout, it will kill the idea of it will create a zero-sum game between us. So I don't want it. I want it win-win. I mean, all along. Okay.
There you go.
Okay. So the idea was to create a kind of a point of reference for the permanent agreement. I think that the most important point in time was the Clinton parameters. It came too late. It had to be given to us before Camp David, and not after Camp David, and not a month before the end of the second term of Clinton. Still, even though officially he took it with him after he ended his term, it is still there and will always be there. And actually what we did was to base our solution on these parameters. I think that it added to the feeling that all of us know by now what kind of a solution are we going to have. Thank you. And now, it will be a different kind of game. We know the price. Are you ready to pay the price or not? This is the question. We know by now who is ready to pay the price and who is not. And I hope that we will speak about it later on. Because this is very, very different than the 90s. I remember when Rabin talked in the Knesset and said eventually it was on the 4th of October, 95, a month before he was assassinated. He gave actually to the Knesset the first speech about the permanent solution, interrupted by the right like hell. So after his speech, I just collected the pieces of the verbatim of his speech in order to understand what he really wanted. He said that the Palestinians will get something which is short of a state. He spoke about the Jordan Valley. He spoke about other things. Because until then, there was no real serious discussion about the permanent solution. And as you know, in Oslo, although people are saying in Oslo they decided upon a Palestinian state, no Palestinian state was mentioned in Oslo. It was an interpretation, not a wrong one, but an interpretation of what we did in Oslo. So the parameters of Clinton were very important to say, okay, this is going more or less to be the solution, and we made it, we got to the details mainly in order to tell ourselves that people who are considered moderate on both sides could find a solution. After came David, in which moderate people on both sides could not find a solution. And Barak went out and said, we don't have a partner. So we asked ourselves, maybe it is true. Maybe we don't have a solution for the refugees. Maybe there is no solution for Jerusalem. Maybe we are just speaking about everybody knows the solution, about peace and security, without actually knowing whether people like us, who are nationalists, but I mean, who are patriotic on both sides, can find a solution. And we prove to ourselves and to the world that people who understand that there is another side and who want to have peace can find solutions to everything. Those who do not want to have peace may always find excuses. Some of them are very nice in order to say we cannot have peace. And this is, I believe, that the achievement. I cannot tell you what we did not do. I can tell you that when we did it, we have done it for 2.5 years. Between 2001 and the end of 2003, the situation was very gloomy, very gloomy. It was a violent situation, unlike the current one. And there were two leaders who did not exchange one word between them in office, Sharon and Arafat. So it was not an optimistic situation in which we said, okay, we will sign the agreement, and in a few months it will be a reality. No, we just wanted to prove something, that it is doable, that's all. So in that respect, it took us much longer than expected, and I believe that the main idea was achieved because, you know, when it was announced that we had an agreement, there was a public opinion poll, which was the headline of the most popular paper in Israel, and we got 39%. People did not bother to read the details. It just showed that there was a reasonable group of people on the Israeli side at least, and it was a parallel picture on the Palestinian side, who wanted very much to have some kind of a solution, and we brought it.